I'm joined by Mohamad Elmasry. He's a professor of media studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Good to have you with us in Al Jazeera. Let's just talk briefly about the budget that the Knesset has passed. $10 billion, it says, is being allocated for defense. We know that back in September, Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel has to become more self-sufficient and more independent because it is facing, as he put it, an increasing number of threats and political isolation around the world. It seems as though Israel is digging in essentially for the long haul. It's recognizing the situation and the future that it now faces.
Absolutely. Historically, of course, the U.S. provides Israel with a very large sum every year in military funding, $3.8 billion annually. That number actually goes up during wartime. So since the October 2023 war started, the U.S. has sent about $20 billion in additional funding. I think that there may be a recognition inside Israel that things may start to change. The American political landscape is changing. More and more Americans are not only critical of Israel, but critical of American support for Israel. So I think there's a sense that things may be shifting in the coming years. But to your point, this does signal that Israel does not view itself as being at the end of a war or wars, as it were, but maybe in the middle or even closer to the beginning. They very much view what happened in October of 2023 as an opportunity. Certainly a tragedy from their perspective because there were casualties and their border was compromised, but an opportunity to advance their Greater Israel project, which they've been doing, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, in Lebanon. I don't think Israel has any intention of giving up this land in the south of Lebanon, south of the Litani. I think they want to try to take it and occupy it, annex it. And even in Syria, we've seen them trying to build a corridor that they're calling David's Corridor that would stretch the Euphrates from the Euphrates area in Iraq all the way into Israel along the southern border of Syria. So this is an opportunity. That's how they view it. But I think they recognize that there's going to be a very long-term war or several sets of wars ongoing in order to make this happen.
Okay, I want to ask you about the messaging that we're getting from Donald Trump. He says that, once again, that the U.S. and Iran are very close to a deal at the same time. We know there are about 50,000 U.S. service personnel in the region now. There's about 10,000 more than normally are here. He has alluded to the fact that he might consider taking Kharg Island, which is the main oil hub for Iran. Again, we're seeing this kind of pull and push, aren't we? And this is a tactic we have seen before with Donald Trump. What's your assessment of what's going on in terms of any sort of negotiations with Iran?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to get a read on Donald Trump. It does seem sometimes that he just kind of says things. I think to some extent, some analysts have suggested that he kind of likes the attention. I think he enjoys going home at night and watching his interviews play back on television, but he speaks a lot in front of the cameras, and he often contradicts himself, sometimes in the same day. So it is difficult to get a read on exactly what his intentions are. But I think a more generous reading would be that he's trying to keep all of his options on the table. I'm not so sure that that's the case, that it's as calculated as that, but that is one possibility. Certainly, I do think that American military commanders are keeping all of the options on the table. I think trying to take over Kharg Island is certainly an option. Certainly, if an opportunity for negotiation presents itself, I think the Americans would take it. This has been a disastrous war for the Americans on many levels. And I think that there are advisors likely in Donald Trump's ear telling him that if there's an off-ramp, that it should be taken as soon as possible.
Well, Iran has made a response, of course, to those statements by Donald Trump, particularly with regard to Kharg Island, but any possible invasion. I'll just take a quick look at that statement from Iran's parliament speaker accusing the U.S. of preparing for a ground invasion. He says, posting on X, Mohammed Khalibaf said the enemy openly sends messages of negotiation and dialogue while secretly plotting a ground attack, unaware that our men are waiting for the American soldiers to enter on the ground so they can rain fire upon them and punish their regional partners. We are aware of the enemy's weaknesses and clearly see the signs of fear and terror in the enemy's army. Mohammed, Iran has made it clear, certainly in the last 3 or 4 weeks of this conflict, that it is now pursuing a policy of an eye for an eye. If a specific target is hit within Iran, Iran will respond and hit a similar target in the region particularly. In the event that Donald Trump did decide to try to take Kharg Island, what are the ramifications in terms of Iran's possible response to that?
Well, I think in this case, there may not be an opportunity for Iran to respond in kind, to do something very similar. But what I would expect is that Iran would attack those U.S. forces very aggressively. I try to respect specialization, so I'm not a security studies scholar, but I have friends who are, and I do follow a lot of the military analysts, and they've suggested that this would be a very difficult operation for the Americans. Maybe not to take the island initially and have a presence there, but to hold it would be very difficult. They would immediately come under very heavy fire from the Iranians, drones and missiles, and it would be difficult to maintain a continuous defense for the island, for the American troops. So some analysts have suggested that it would be a kind of bloodbath. I don't think anyone should underestimate the American forces. They are formidable, these special forces, but this would be a very, very difficult operation. It's also an unpopular suggestion in America. Some of the recent polling data is very troubling for Trump. Americans don't want to take over Kharg Island. They don't want this war. They want it to stop. There was just a new poll released a few days ago by Pew. It's very unfavorable for Trump. There are also some other polls. There was a Fox News poll just put out the other day that shows that 64% of those polled disagree with, or I should say disapprove of Donald Trump's handling of the war. So Donald Trump is going to have to have a delicate balance here going forward, because as I've said before, and as many other analysts have noted, this is a midterm election year. So he doesn't want to ruin Republican hopes in November.
I want to bring us back just briefly to the subject of the negotiations, particularly the ones that are being mediated by Pakistan. We've had this 15-point plan that Donald Trump has put forward for Iran. We don't know what Iran's response is to that yet, but we understand that there has been a list of demands that Iran itself has put forward. As far as I can tell, with a couple of very small changes, particularly with regard to the US and the Strait of Hormuz, there doesn't seem to be a lot that has changed compared to the demands that both sides were making prior to the conflict. What is your assessment, do you think, of how do you view the way that both sides could actually approach these negotiations in Pakistan, were they to actually go to Islamabad and have a discussion? Because there seems to be very little common ground to move forward on.
Yeah, I don't think that they could be farther apart, to be honest. When you look at the 15-point plan that the Americans have put out and that 5-point response, if you will, that the Iranians have put out, they couldn't be farther apart. I read that through that leaked 15-point plan by the Americans, and to me, it looks like a surrender document. It's a request for the Iranians, or a demand for the Iranians to surrender. They would be giving up basically their ability to defend themselves against Israel, giving up their long-range missiles, ending their proxy network. They would be essentially defenseless against Israel. So I don't understand or see how any rational actor would accept those terms. On the other hand, the Iranians are putting forth items and demands that the Americans won't like either. So we're in this quagmire, and I think that's one of the reasons why escalation is a very real possibility right now, especially with these American troops coming into the region. I think it's been a dangerous war from the start, but I think it could get much more dangerous here in the coming days and weeks.
Mohamad Elmasry, we appreciate it as always. Thank you very much indeed.